Welcome to Name 3 Songs. I'm Sarah Fagan.
I'm Jenna Million, and this is a podcast where we challenge sexism in the music industry and empower fangirls. Because let's be honest, fangirls knew about that band way before you did.
And if you stick around long enough, we'll also let you in on some new music that girls are already crazy about. And before we get into things today, we do have a new Patreon member to shout out. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining us over on our Patreon community. We're so happy to have you. And don't forget to go join us over on our Discord of Friendship. Get to know the other members of our Patreon community. Everybody over there is so awesome. And if you are new to our podcast or you've just been missing us in your feed now that we've gone to bi-weekly episodes, you can get bonus content over on our Patreon, including monthly music meltdown episodes, as well as mini episodes whenever there's music news that we feel like we really need to chat about. And you can get all of that over at patreon.com/name3songs.
So today we have a very long, a very informative, and a very fun episode. So Sarah, can you tell everyone just exactly what we're getting into today?
Yeah, today's episode is, like Jenna said, very informative and very fun and interesting. And I think it kind of like even went into realms that I wasn't expecting from like the initial idea that we had, which was that we obviously love pop music, so we've been trying to figure out a way to talk about girl groups, meaning the like girl groups of the 90s, early 2000s, but there's not a lot of articles out there about why America was like, LOL, not really interested in this. So we had to figure out another angle, and we have a journalist who is our guest today, who we're both very big fans of her writing, who specializes in K-pop, and we're like, oh my god, maybe we can do something comparing like why K-pop girl groups are wildly successful in Korea, but like aren't really translating as much in the Western market. See what they're trying to do to make them explode over here and how that's not working and where it is working. And so we kind of accumulated a very interesting, very like retrospective kind of episode here, going over America turning their back on girl power that the Spice Girls created and being really obsessed with like individualism and girls being against girls, and how any girl groups that kind of happened that were created in America, like all of their music didn't exist specifically for girl groups. Like there was literally no reason for them other than like the assumption that people might be interested in groups of women, but like they weren't giving us any reason to be interested in them as a group of friends or comrades or anything along those lines. Whereas K-pop seems to have figured out how to do that, where you feel like you could be their friend and you also kind of want to be them and you want to hang out with them and all these things. Whereas like most American girl groups, it was kind of just like they were out of reach from the listeners, and that's not what you want when you see a group of girls. You want to feel like you could be the fifth or sixth member or what have you of that group. So we're learning all about this. We're unpacking a lot of misogyny and movie tropes that seep into real life, and it's a hefty bag that we are unpacking today, and it's a very exciting episode. And so with that being said, Jenna, would you like to introduce everybody to our very lovely, very smart, very informed, very helpful guest today?
Yes, so today we are joined by Tamar Herman, who is currently a senior culture reporter at Hong Kong newspaper, the South China Morning Post. She's been covering K-pop and K-pop related content for outlets such as Billboard, Forbes, and NBC News over the years, and she released her first book entitled BTS, Blood, Sweat, and Tears in August 2020. And you can also find her in the K-pop episode of Vox's Explained on Netflix and the YouTube series K-pop Evolution. So of course, we could not have a more perfect guest for this episode. And with that being said, hi Tamar, welcome to Name 3 Songs. We're so excited to have you here for this chat today.
Thanks so much for having me.
This is going to be a really fun conversation today because we get to talk about girl groups and why America hates them, no matter how hard people are trying to have girl groups break America, which is like, it's just going to be a very in-depth, interesting conversation onto this topic, because I'm sure from like past episodes and like things that we've talked about, just like with you guys are lovely listeners, you guys are aware how I grew up with girl groups and that was everything I cared about. And because of that, I've been really interested in the fact that K-pop girl groups exist, but the excitement around them, at least again from my perspective as somebody who's not deep in the trenches of K-pop, doesn't seem as big as like the boy band excitement in the K-pop realm. And so it harkens back to the fact that the Spice Girls were really popular in America for like the 2.5 years that the Spice Girls existed. And then America tried to kind of copy that fame with a bunch of other girl groups that didn't really fit within that girl power idea that the Spice Girls were, selling, because America just didn't understand it. And it's a really interesting thing to think about and look at, because there was like a boom of girl groups. A lot of them were very like Disney Channel-esque girl groups. You had Dream and No Secrets and 3LW and obviously Destiny's Child and TLC, but the R&B girl groups are like a whole other realm of music that I think kind of like existed in a different platform. Like their music was good.
I feel like that also like kind of was like more of a correlation to like Motown's history rather than
Yeah.
like Spice Girl, like the girl group idea. It obviously has like correlation, but like TLC, 3LW, Destiny's Child, those were all like, they had way more of a built-in audience just by like being like part of hip hop, R&B, while also leaning into pop. But like I feel like Spice Girls and Destiny's Child like are two different huge conversations.
Yeah, 100%. Which is why we're going to be focusing more on these confused white girl groups that were happening in America, because again, like I was saying, like most of their songs didn't necessarily have to be sung by a girl group. Like the fact that they were a girl group didn't really have anything to do with anything. Like they were just a group of girls thrown into a recording studio singing a song. It didn't ever feel like there was camaraderie or friendship or anything like that, but it also felt like they weren't ever a group that you as a fan could like maneuver yourself into being a part of or being able to hang out with them, because none of them had discernible personalities like the Spice Girls did or that sort of thing. And something that I've learned from doing research for this episode and Jenna's help is that the K-pop girl groups kind of have that similar thing where they all kind of have their personality and they have something going for them. And it's going to be really interesting when we get more into the K-pop side of things to learn about like how they've started catering towards the girl power aesthetic a bit more, because it wasn't initially what the plan was from what I'm told. But we are starting with
It depends.
the American idea, and how also like England was really obsessed with girl groups and still are, and a lot of those girl groups have been having reunions and like resurgences and all that sort of thing. And even up till now with like the juxtaposition between Fifth Harmony and Little Mix, and how Little Mix very much went with the girl power route. Their songs very much had to be sung by a girl group, were very much friendship above all else, even when they were love songs. Whereas Fifth Harmony, any pop girly could have sang a Fifth Harmony song and it wouldn't have mattered if it was 5 people or 1 person singing that song. But so my question for everyone is, what has been your relationship throughout your life with girl groups? Because for me, there's still songs that I throw on. I know they're not going to be that great, but like I still listen to Play and Jump 5 and S Club 7, who are mixed gender groups, but I still love it. It's still on my pool playlist for the summertime. So, Tamar, what has your relationship been like with this kind of music?
So we get to hear the sad stop story about how I wasn't allowed to listen to like pop music growing up until like I rebelled at the age of 12 and it was like, I need to listen to the radio. That's really weird, Mom. I'm not even I'm from a modern Orthodox Jewish background, but like that isn't, my friends listen to music. My mom was just weird. Like it was, I don't know. And I was like such a goody two shoes. But of course I like knew most of the groups you're talking about, either because like I heard them in life and also because like friends listened to them. And when I was at Friends, we listened to them. I very distinctly remember listening to the Spice Girls the first time at like gymnastics summer camp when we did routines to them. And like, it's funny because like as I've grown up, I'm like, I know that I have weird gaps in my pop culture like knowledge. Radio Disney was everything. Like I remember like they had so many girl groups. So like it's like Spice Girls and then like random group. And of course you had, again, like we said, like Destiny's Child, 3LW, TLC. Those were all like kind of at a different promotional cycle. Like they weren't on the
Yeah.
same era in my mind, but they all were obviously part of the same thing. But I think it's just like promotions and marketing. And so I really only became a huge girl group fan when I became a K-pop fan when I was like in high school. But one thing that, because we are talking particularly about my area of expertise, K-pop, actually a lot of early K-pop girl groups were kind of supposed to be sort of empowering. One of the big first ones, SES, was a trio kind of in the line of like 3LW, TLC, Destiny's Child, but not really, because like K-pop groups in general are kind of similarly in the line of Japanese idol groups, which traditionally girl groups are targeting male audiences. So even though there was like a little bit of a shift, it's just different.
My first CD when I was probably like 5 or 6 was like Britney Spears' like debut album. And that was like, you know, as we've talked about Britney so much, it was like, is Britney for the kids? Should kids be having this CD? Don't know. I think my parents were a little bit questioning, but like I totally missed the Spice Girls era. And then Destiny Child wasn't even on my radar. And so it wasn't until like Cheetah Girls, like High School Musical, like Camp Rock, we were talking about, like that would have been more my time in my generation. And then like Little Mix, because like I loved One Direction like from the get-go, basically since they had one X Factor. So then when Little Mix came around, I was aware of them, but I was never like super into them. I think like I had a few of their songs like on my playlist and whatnot. And then also just Little Mix never really came to America that much. They just like didn't market themselves very hard in America. And so it wasn't accessible. Like for me, my perspective is that it wasn't accessible. It was something you had to like seek out if you wanted to be the Little Mix fan as an American. And then with Fifth Harmony, I don't remember what year it was they came about, but I think I was into my like bandom era at that point of like 1975 and like more like rock bands that like I didn't care. I didn't have like Fifth Harmony's not for me. Like they were also formed on like American X Factor, so I'm like this isn't even applicable to me. And so then again, like with me getting into K-pop more recently in the past year or so, I feel like as we go through this conversation, we'll see like I feel like I've also kind of had those prejudices of America doesn't like girl groups, I don't like girl groups, therefore in K-pop it's taken me longer to like get into girl groups and like become to like them.
Yeah.
No, you should like them.
It's interesting that you say that though, because it's kind of again that thing where I feel like America really leaned into the I'm not like other girls trope in real life, which again is similar to other episodes we've done of talking about pop culture tropes that have leaked into the real world and like really genuinely affected women and teen girls specifically, because it's like we've talked again something we've talked about where it's like in the 2010s sort of era you had Katy Perry, Kesha, Lady Gaga, and they were all like very camp but like very different, and they were all for like a different type of girly sort of thing. And like I was saying before, like the girl groups that were existing when we were younger, especially the ones being made in America, like they weren't really promoting that much of the girl power situation. Like the closest I could think of is No Secrets promoting friendship to some degree, because they had the cover, I think, of Kids in America. They had like one other song that I can't remember that was like very like friendship, but also if you listen to their other songs on their CD, all of the songs are just about like them chasing boys around. So most girl groups were just kind of like chasing boys. That's what girls do, you know? Oh, that's literally the name of the No Secret song. That's what girls do. But again, this is something that I think we kind of touched on a little bit when we talked about boy bands with Maria Sherman, was that boy bands were specifically made for girls, and then girl groups in America were also specifically made for girls, because America is a capitalist empire that does everything just to make money, and young girls are where all of the money is. And so like these girl groups were specifically just marketed to, I think they thought it was going to be teen girls, and then it wound up being children being obsessed with them. But it was just this really interesting thing of everything felt very much like you couldn't really be part of that girl group no matter how hard you tried. They were people you kind of aspired to be like, but could probably never hang out with, because they also were just like all so pretty. Like I'm just remembering like Play and like Dream and like those sort of groups where they all just were like had such nice skin and such nice outfits, and they could all dance really well and all those sorts of things. And like the dynamic and like relationship between them was very like you didn't know who they were. Like, they weren't trying to sell you them. They were just trying to sell you music, which I think is interesting, especially compared to the Spice Girls.
I mean, I agree with you entirely, but one group that I keep on thinking of as we're talking is the Pussycat Dolls, because they were like right after kind of like the girl group era, just like nobody cared about most of the girl groups. Like, again, like you said, like it ended up being like kids, and it didn't really make it into like the zeitgeist, like a lot of those groups. Like, it didn't go from Radio Disney to Z100. Like, it just didn't.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't go from tweens and kids to people listening to. But then you have Pussycat Dolls, which was way more.
Yeah.
I think everyone knows Buttons and a lot of their early stuff, and like even though they imploded, they were more sexy and they were like a different sort of audience seeking, and like you could argue that it was guys, but it also was probably a lot of women who are just like, oh cool, someone's sexy on stage and doing burlesque and dancing, and like but I don't think anyone really knows how to market any girl groups in the US. Like, even now, like I love Fifth Harmony as like an idea, but some of their songs you just listen to and you're like, does this need to be a girl group? Like you said, like I don't know, like Work From Home is a fun song, but what does that have to do with the idea of what a girl group can or should be? And I don't know if anybody knows what that is. Like, I don't think even fans really know what they want a girl group to be in the US.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that was Sarah's point earlier too, is it's like they're giving songs that like don't need to be by girl groups, but girl groups kind of need to have a purpose. And like the Spice Girls hit on that so well because it was about girl power. It was about their friendship. It was about them being individual people. And they each had that personality, just like they each had the Posh Spice, Baby Spice. Like, they all had their nicknames. And that's why I think it was so easily digestible. And I think why these other groups like Play and Dream didn't last is because there was no purpose. They were just trying to copy and paste the success of girl groups without having literally any purpose. And Sarah, something you said just a minute ago was that like both boy groups and girl groups were marketed to a young female audience. And like, as we've talked about with boy bands so much, like there is a lot of buying power there. But I think it's also that the idea that girl groups could ever be marketed to an American male is literally never gonna happen, never crossed anyone's minds, because men and even like teenage boys, the way they're brought up, they're not empathizing with a girl group, like empathizing with women or like looking up to them or being like, oh, she could be my girlfriend. They don't go through that same like emotional discourse that you do as like a teenage fangirl. Like, it's not even in the playbook at all.
Yeah. And like the thing that I also find interesting and was also sort of mentioned. So Sasha Geffen wrote this article in Fader in June of 2018 called Serious Question, Where Are All the Girl Groups? And so Sasha writes, by watching girls interact with each other while performing hit songs, female millennials could learn to model their own friendships and forge their own personalities in relation to one another. And so, not to say that the Spice Girls changed all of our lives, but to say that the Spice Girls changed all of our lives, I feel like the camaraderie that does exist between millennial women, like younger millennial women, is a lot to thank because of the Spice Girls and kind of growing up young and being taught that, and then realizing as we got older that like the media was trying to brainwash us to think that other girls were our enemies, our competition, when the Spice Girls the whole time were like, they're not, don't listen to them. All girls are your besties and girls before bros. and it's like this interesting thing because I feel like what you were saying, Jenna, is like these other girl groups, they didn't have discernible personalities. It would be like, oh, there's a redhead, there's a blonde, and there's a brunette. And then there's one like ethnically ambiguous girl in the back right corner. You should just relate to them automatically without knowing anything about them because we're giving you crumbs. And it's like, okay, just because there might be one member of the group that I look like doesn't mean I'm going to be excited about them in the same way that I was excited about Baby Spice, who I did not look like, but dressed like every day of my life.
Oh, so cute.
So it's just those things where it's like when you know someone, you feel more connected to them and you kind of follow their ethos and their lessons and all that sort of thing. And I feel like that should have been the point of girl groups and like initially was. And then they were just like, let's just bang them out. Let's just send out one after another and see what happens. And nothing happened.
Like, what sticks? I keep on thinking about the Josie and the Pussycat movie.
Sarah's favorite movie ever.
Came out around that era, right?
Yeah.
And just like that whole movie is kind of about that like taking the actual idea of like what this girl group is, like this band is, and who these identities are, and just like making them down into like pitting them against each other. And like it's just Josie because she's way more marketable as a single act and she makes way more money as a single act. And like how dare women have different personalities and think and maybe like be unhappy with their situations in the world. And it just like always, as we're talking, kind of feels like, yeah, the comparison is like those other girl groups are just so, I don't want to say bland because obviously they are people and had personalities and were real people, but like the marketing was bland. Like I don't remember like opening up a magazine and being like, oh, let me see what Dream is talking about. But like Spice Girls, they were marketed well. Everyone knew who they were, like they were everywhere. And is it just because they were marketed well? Like they were resonating. Like Play was another crossover, like they're Swedish, I think, and Swedish musicians are, you know, so big and producers are so big, like it should have been an easy fix, but we just know their songs still. We don't know anything about the band members. Like it's a whole marketing thing. Like how do you market a girl group? And it's like, we're just gonna try and throw everything at people and hope that it sticks. And like that's what worked with the Spice Girls, but maybe nobody has any other idea what to do with anybody.
The other thing that just came to mind as you made like the reference to the Josie and the Pussycats movie is that all the girl groups that we've seen, probably Little Mix is the one that's been together the longest, because like obviously Spice Girls were a hot flash on the pan, but like the cultural impact is insane, and they did like a reunion kind of recently, but we haven't seen a girl group like grow up together. And I think part of that is the idea that when you're young, or like when you're younger, it's more normal to like have female friends, and like especially as a kid, like you never even think about it twice. And then when you grow up and the world is like, women are your competition, it's like, in what world would we have, because like the Pussycat Dolls were probably like older in age range, I'm not like 100% sure, but just like because of their like sexy marketing, I'm assuming that they were like in their early mid-20s. But like if you think of the Pussycat Dolls, like were they even selling best friends? Like I feel like they were just selling sex. And like are women in their mid-20s allowed to be friends, you know?
Yeah, well, the Pussycat Dolls is a story we can get into at another time, but it was like all of them against Nicole Scherzinger, and Nicole Scherzinger being like, none of you are allowed to sing, even if you can, and I will lock you in a bathroom if you try, which actually happened. It's like a whole thing that clearly was like, bad communication, stupid record label, everything stupid happening at once, because that girl group so clearly was selling other girls are my competition and I will tear her down as quickly as possible to get on top if I'm allowed to. And so it's so funny because it was in that weird space where there weren't really any girl groups happening. They were like trying to, like we said, I think a lot of people that I grew up with assumed that they were found at a strip club. I think they were like Tamar side burlesque dancers, and like only Nicole could quote unquote sing, but Melody could as well. It's a whole thing. But it's funny that they were in that era because they were still kind of selling that like, oh, I'm not like other girls mentality, and like every girl for themselves, even when they're supposed to be working in unison. And I think that kind of harkens back to like the idea of like women in the workplace and like women feeling like they have to be like other than the other women in the workplace, and how like most of the psychology written around why there's competition between women goes back to like a business standpoint, because it's like, oh, men don't know how to work with women, and like when there's like 30% of women in the room, men see that as like there's actually more women than them in the room, even though it's only 30% of people in the room. And these sorts of situations where just like men don't understand how to work with women, so women feel like they have to act more like men, and they like can't have camaraderie with other women. And I feel like that keeps correlating back to this girl group thing, and like very much to Fifth Harmony and why Fifth Harmony didn't succeed, because they just felt like a group of cousins that could all sing, and their grandma was like, you're a group now, and they're like, but grandma, if we were not related we would hate each other. And she's like, I don't fucking care, you're gonna make this family money. And then they like went and did it, and they all clearly didn't like each other, and it was just like so obvious. And then all their songs made no sense, including Sledgehammer, because if your heart was going like a sledgehammer, you'd be dying, when they clearly meant jackhammer, because that's what goes fast and is excited.
something that you were just saying, like, not to make everything about K-pop, but you were just reminding me that a lot of the most, even if they're a very successful K-pop girl group, if one member becomes the face of it, like, not necessarily that, like, on the business side of things they're pushing her specifically, but like if there is a personality who is more well known, or like she becomes a famous actress, or like maybe she has a career before the group and is like well known for that, the group tends to break up and it's a really bad situation. Like, even though K-pop kind of has it more streamlined, so like each member has more of like a personality and a role, kind of like Spice Girls did, so again, more individualized, more like everyone could be empathic to a different member or something. So like groups like 4 Minute, which had a member named Tiana who was very popular as a soloist, and also she was in Wonder Girl, it was like a whole thing. Like, that group never really got out of Hyuna's shadow. And same thing with Miss A, which was a girl group. They had pushed the other members really seriously. Like, there was another member named Min, who I actually just interviewed, if anybody wants to read that, who was like pushed by the company so much. And then this member Suzy kind of just blew up, and now she's like the epitome of a singer turned actress who's really well respected in Korea and like really beloved. But like the group dynamic never worked for any of these girl groups. Whereas boy bands, that tends to help the boy band, but for girl groups, it's like if the person stands out, like kind of like the business mindset takes over, where like either the companies or the groups themselves can't figure out how to get out from that umbrella of this one singular member overshadowing everybody else. So it's like the Pussycat Doll syndrome.
I definitely understand that though, because I think with Spice Girls, there was this level of like egalitarianism of like everyone was on the same playing field, like there was no hierarchy. And I feel like that's what you're getting at, is like in girl groups specifically, when there starts to be a hierarchy, that's when like things fall apart. And even with like Fifth Harmony, I can't talk from like when they were together, but like just looking at their solo careers since, like Camila being the clear like front runner, and then of course Normani's building out her career now, and then Lauren has also had a solo career, but Camila had a lot of like Billboard hits, radio hits, whatnot as a solo artist. And so I do think that is like that hierarchy aspect is really interesting. And also thinking of this article that Sasha put together, they write, over the past 20 years, girl power has subsided in a favor of a more individualistic pop feminism. The posse has lost its power and female executive has risen in its place. Sheryl Sandberg's lean-in philosophy informs mainstream imaginings of a woman in a man's world. Wonder Woman only becomes superhero because she leaves her sapphic utopia to fight alongside men, and immensely powerful female singers command historic numbers on the Billboard charts, if sporadically. And of course, this was written a few years ago, so I feel like we have a lot more women on the Billboard charts now. But I just think it's really interesting kind of like tying these two ideas together of like, there can only be one woman that comes out on top of like this idea of hierarchy and this idea of competition, and modeling yourself in a way that a man will respect it. And I feel like what we're hinting at here with this whole episode is that somehow all of these ideas of feminism and what men respect or don't respect is tied together, and why girl groups have or have not been successful in America.
Well, even Spice Girls to some degree, like, I mean, Victoria Beckham's probably still the best known name brand beyond like her identity in Spice Girls. So still one still kind of rises to the top, even though like, you know, Ginger was kind of considered like the leader of the group, and I think you feel like you read. But like they were all songwriting, they were involved in the production to some degree, like which most teeny bopper girl groups of our childhood were not. So again, it's like such a different perspective of like what can a girl group be versus what companies make them to be. Because like obviously Spice Girls was put together by not the members themselves, but like by saying, yes, you should have some role in creating your identity and creating who you are.
So the interesting thing that you pointed out here, which brings me back to this idea of like a genuine female friendship group, which is what the Spice Girls felt like, is it's like, yes, Victoria Beckham, Posh Spice is definitely now the most like known household name, like still has a lot of relevance in celebrity culture. But at the time, like you said, like Ginger Spice was like the leader of the pack, but differently from No Secrets, who had like a clear front woman solo singer, even though we didn't know anything about them, or the Pussycat Dolls with Nicole Scherzinger or whatever. It's like the Spice Girls were like evenly dispersed, and even though at the time it's like, oh, Posh is kind of like the hot one dating David Beckham, whatever, like every friendship group is going to have like that one like fancy friend who's like hotter than everyone else with a really hot boyfriend, and the one bossy friend who's like, no, I am the leader of the pack, I don't care how hot you are. And so again, I feel like that goes to like the relatability of them and like why there was so much interest in it, and why to this day like they still hold so much power even though they literally existed for like no time at all. is because it felt like a real friendship group. And I think that that's similar to like Little Mix's appeal, is that like it felt like a real friendship group. It's still now, even with only 3 of them left, feels like a real friendship group. And like their songs are things that you genuinely have like dealt with or gone through or like wish you could have, in regards to like their song Black Magic, which like obviously magic, whatever. But it's like those sorts of situations. And again, it's just interesting because it also goes back to like what Jenna said, just the underlying misogyny of America and like American culture, and like how if men don't like something or don't show interest in it, like there's always going to be an issue. Because even with One Direction, who were super successful, it was like there were always certain men who had high power spaces, whether that be in music journalism like Rob Sheffield or in radio like Elvis Duran, who were backing them and being like, oh, we should support this boy band. Whereas like with girl groups, it just always felt like men were only talking about them because of like some sort of sex appeal reason rather than anything else. Yeah. Whereas like with One Direction, even at the start of the pandemic on TikTok, like all these guys were like rediscovering One Direction because of Harry Styles and being like, so wow, they were actually good. And it's like, no fucking shit. Like, when has a girl ever been wrong? Never. And so it is interesting because I feel like that's what I'm so intrigued by from what you guys have talked to me about the K-pop girl groups, is that like at some point the K-pop industry was like, oh, we're going to market girl groups to men because boy bands are doing so well with women. Girl groups gotta do well with men. And I think that's so interesting. And like, I would love to learn more about this and help our audience learn more about this, because I'm just like, guys in America would never go out of their way to buy a Dream album or a No Secrets album or even like a 3LW album. Like, they wouldn't really. Like, obviously, I'm talking specifically about, like, Chads of the world, like very straight, heterosexual, male-gazy kind of men, because no matter how sexy the girl groups were, it was more gay men that were interested in the Pussycat Dolls than straight men. And so I just think it's really interesting that straight men were the key marketing demographic at some point for K-pop girl groups. At least that's what it seems.
I do want to emphasize that I'm not sure that's necessarily, like, it's definitely true for some groups, but it's not like an overall stereotype. Like, the most successful K-pop girl groups do have to have a female audience that supports them, because otherwise you don't make money. But before I get to that, I like was writing notes to myself as you were talking, and like I just like scribbled down, is America just really scared of a group of girls like doing something, and like the idea of the music industry supporting that is like terrifying to people, I guess. Yes. Like in the industry. Literally. And it's just so sad, like, oh no, girls doing something together, how dare they?
Literally. That's what it is.
But yeah, the history of K-pop is like really complicated, and in general we just kind of talk about mid-90s being like the start of K-pop as we know it, and the girl groups that kind of came out of this, like groups like SES and Finkel, a few others from that generation, they were like kind of a mix between either really intense vocal pop groups, kind of think like Destiny's Child, SES, I always think of them like that, and like girl power, but also kind of, you know, still flirty, and like we still love guys and stuff, but there was a more idea of camaraderie. If you don't know anything about K-pop, know this: every single group member pretty much has a role in the group. You have the visual, which means they're probably the hottest, or like stereotypically hottest. You have the vocal, you have the dancer, you have the rapper, you have the mood maker or whatever. Now they don't really use terms like this, but they used to, like, for the one who like was just kind of like goofy and like set the tone of like the group, and like the leader used to be the oldest one, and now it's kind of just like something that either doesn't exist or like the most responsible one according to the company. And so girl groups that really kind of took off internationally outside of Korea, where like if you're in Korea and you're Korean, the country's small and they're able to market, you're relatable because you're a Korean girl and Korean girls are invested in you, and Korean guys are like, oh, they're cute and pretty. It's like Britney Spears. Like, guys maybe didn't want to be here, but they knew who she was. And so girl groups in like the modern era of K-pop, as like international audiences are aware of it, began kind of around 2008 outside of Asia. So in that era, it was like girl groups like Kara, who was big in Japan, were kind of more, I wouldn't say that they were like particularly sexy, but like they were kind of more targeting male audiences. But then you have girl groups at the same time, like Girls' Generation, which were literally and are still considered like a group that is aspirational. Like their first song, called Into the New World, ended up becoming a very popular protest anthem for feminists in South Korea, or just a general protest anthem. So like when there was a presidential change and someone got impeached, there was like a song that people sang. And you had girl groups that were literally made to be like empowering female icons, like 21, who debuted in 2009. And you just had a lot of groups that were kind of either you wanted to be them or you wanted to be best friends with them. And this was kind of what most of them were like. And you do have a lot of like cutesy, sexy girl groups. There was a girl group called After School, which was supposed to be like a riff on Pussycat Dolls. These identities weren't necessarily tied into necessarily who they wanted to be attracted to them, as much as like finding an audience that related to them. So you'll definitely go to a girl group concert, especially newer girl groups in Korea tend to have more male audiences. But if you go a few years down the career and they're still active and making money, it's probably female audiences. So that means like that the initial audience is maybe men who are like in for the like sexiness or for like the cutesiness, if that's their thing. But the people who stay and prolong the career are the girls. So like you literally have songs that are just like, yeah, of course they're like romance songs, but you also have songs that are kind of like showing them as, you know, quirky girls or the girl next door, or just like the whole idea is that like nowadays like K-pop stars tend to be also fashion influencers, and like yes, they're fashion influencers, but it's kind of like, oh, I wish I could wear that on Instagram. Let me go look at Shein right now to go see if I could wear that same thing. And I just think like the idea that all K-pop girl groups are just selling sex is wrong, and the idea that all K-pop girl groups are targeting female audiences is also wrong. There's a lot of K-pop girl groups, so there's like so much going on out there. And nowadays you have even girl groups who aren't targeting, like they are targeting audiences like real human people, but like you have groups like aespa, which is a sort of metaverse-y inspired girl group. Essentially, like they're a girl group that is more like Game of Thrones than anything else ever before. Like they're a girl group who has a story built into them. Like they're real people. People know what their personalities are like on camera and like through what they show fans, but they also have like a storyline that is built around them. So like literally in their songs, they're incorporating plot points into their songs. So like the audience of K-pop girl groups is just like really diverse, because I think I wouldn't say less of a stigma towards girls being in a group together, but I think there is sort of like, there's obviously like the whole K-pop industry to some degree is recognized as being very, very male dominated. There are many females in powerful positions, of, like, but most companies are still headed by a guy. But there's like some famous female creative directors who you kind of know when they're involved in a girl group, because that girl group is like has a little something special going on with them. But you can kind of tell when the perspective is from the female perspective more than like the male gazy one. But again, like right now, not to call anybody out, but this new girl group called Le Sserafim, which is from the same company as BTS, they have been kind of accused of being too sexy. Like their clothes as a baby debut girl group is like too sexy, and their concept is too sexy. And that's not what girl groups should be nowadays. Girl groups should not be selling sex. They should be empowering. They should have a more equal, every girl feel. So like you have other girl groups like Weekly, which is like more schoolgirly, and like they wear like fun trendy clothes that like you'd want to wear on the weekend. So there's like a lot of differentiation, and there's kind of conversations happening around K-pop, even in Korea, about like what is supposed to be selling a girl group. Like there are many girl groups whose careers have been saved because a fan took a really sexy video of them and went viral. This has happened multiple times. So this is like something that K-pop kind of always has. It's like, how do you sell sex without being too sexy? Because then you get criticized like Le Sserafim is. And now like I just saw like today's stage outfits from a performance, because they perform like a lot of times when they first release a song, and like the comments were literally like they put them in like more angelic looking outfits, like I'm not sure if it's to counter kind of that accusation that they had initially, because like the band doesn't pick their own clothes, but it's like concept and marketing and stuff. So obviously, like, how do you be sexy without sexualizing? And anybody who wants to be any level of sexy that they want, they should be able to do. But K-pop is more rigid than that. There's so many people deciding on what a girl group wears or even a boy group wears, but it's just hard to kind of decide you have to do it within the realms of like what's okay, and what is okay now is not maybe what was okay 10 years ago when K-pop girl groups tended to market themselves more directly to guys.
Information like this is really helpful because I feel like a lot of our listeners don't necessarily know what's going on, and like even just from what I was reading, it was interesting to like hear somebody who like has been listening to this and also writing about this for such a long time, because it is so out of my realm of like industry knowledge. Because looking at graphs and stuff, it's interesting how, like you were saying, like at the start it's kind of like men, and then they're like, oh, women have more buying power, which has been something that's been proven in countless countries. And so then from your guys' perspectives, has there been a clear change like in an artist like look or songs or something when they kind of move to more focusing on the buying power of women rather than like the starting off power of the male attraction to girl groups?
I think it depends. Like, it's kind of hard to say because K-pop is very structured in how they look at audiences. So, like, they are aware already. Like, when you market a girl group, you already know the audience you need to really get behind after the initial wave of audience support is typically either like female fans or queer fans. You need that money, you need that support, you need that dedication. And so you have girl groups who like will debut with like a cutesy concept or maybe like a sexy concept, and or versus like a girl next door or empowering one. And like when I say concept, I literally mean these are like what these bands, like if you put it on a marketing board, what this band is supposed to sound like and look like, these will be like the terms that they'll throw up. And so you have girl groups like Girl Generation, who I mentioned before, who like now they have a song that is essentially like a protest anthem. And the members have various different careers and have done a lot of stuff with their career and are considered a huge hit. They like started off pretty cutesy, but their first song was still very aspirational, and then they went kind of cutesy. So it depends on like the era of a career. So like, but they've also had stuff where they're like sexier or more dramatic. There's not really groups that like are like, we're gonna target the guys and then we're gonna switch to the girls. Like Brave Girls, they were releasing pretty sexy stuff. Like they're produced by a guy. They were put together by a guy. They were produced by a guy who has made a lot of really hit like dance songs and like sultry dance song. He's like known for this sort of music. So like they released sexy songs, and like if a group kind of flops, maybe they might try something new. So it's not necessarily that like they were targeting guys and now they're targeting girls. It might just be like because they recognize that audience is there, is like they might be desperate and they need to try something new to make money. But like there's always some layer of sex being sold or gender being sold, like the identity being sold with every girl group from around the world ever, and every pop act ever. Sex sells. But you have groups like 21, who are a famous K-pop girl group. They're from the same company that now has BLACKPINK. And like if you compare 21 to BLACKPINK, 21 was less like overtly, I wouldn't say sexy as much as like flirty, like the feminine, or like the members of 21 on the basic level wearing pants. One member, she wore dresses and like that was her thing, but like the other ones, like there was more pants, it was more athletic, whereas BLACKPINK is more like feminine, like they're literally the advertising models for like Dior and Chanel. So like the target is like, okay, first of all, who is Dior and Chanel targeting? Women, obviously. But still, like, the audience is like, these are a little bit more feminine or a little bit more sexy rather than a little bit more girl powery like 21 was, which is like a lot of words for saying they're marketing towards girls, but also like BLACKPINK is a little bit more marketable towards boys. But 21 was also really huge towards everybody, so it didn't really matter how they ended up marketing them because people liked them. So the marketing, I think, is like typically, at the end of the day, they might know that they can sell sex for a minute, but they almost always have to change if they want to have longevity. Because like the groups that are sexy, they tend not to really do well in the long run. Like maybe they do for a bit, but then they end up sinking because there just isn't the audience supporting them typically.
Yeah, I think like the main thing that I'm hearing from like how you're describing this is that there has to be dynamics, and this is something that K-pop is really good at, of every single comeback. And it depends on the artist. Some artists have like 3 comebacks a year, which means they're putting out a single or an album or an EP. That's just what we call a comeback. Not that they were on hiatus and then they're returning. But some artists are very very active in their comebacks and will constantly, every single comeback is a different concept. Others, if they're not releasing music as often, you see it less from them, but every time it's a new era. And I think relating this to like American like pop solo artists, we've talked on this podcast how a lot of pop artists who came about when they were a teenager always had this era, and I'm thinking specifically, Sarah, when we talked about Selena Gomez, where it feels like they just go like overly sexy. They're like, I'm a woman now, I'm a sexual being now, I can talk about being sexy, and then they realize like they kind of took it too far, and then they like reel it back in for like the rest of their albums. But the quote unquote concepts is like, it's there, but it's less distinct because we don't talk about it in the same way. Like Taylor Swift, every single album has a distinct identity, but we don't call it like, ooh, the like gossip concept for like Reputation or like the revenge concept. Like we don't talk about it in that way, but that's literally what she's doing. And Taylor Swift is, in the American standard, Taylor Swift is the best at applying concepts. So I think like when we talk about like girl groups and K-pop, all of these concepts, when we talk about sexy, there's like cool sexy, and then there's like feminine sexy, and then there's like male gaze sexy. It's like, it's so nuanced, but there are these like little differences. But also just from like my personal perspective of getting into K-pop, I was immediately drawn towards the boy groups because that's what I've always known growing up. Like I was a huge One Direction fan. And as I said earlier, I never really had like a girl group in my life to like look up to or like to admire anyway. And like I've loved different solo pop girlies like Dua Lipa, Ellie Goulding. So like there has been that, but like when it was like when I was getting into K-pop, and part of this is probably the internalized misogyny and why it's less common for American audiences to enjoy girl groups, is I just felt like it wasn't for me. I was like, they're too cutesy or they're too this, but a lot of it was just like my projections of what it was, or like judgments, and not actually understanding a whole lot, not understanding that there are like strong women within K-pop, because I ended up getting into more girl groups by listening to their music and being like, wow, I really love their music, and then like looking at their music videos and then discovering it that way, versus boy groups, I get into them because of their personalities, and then I get into their music and I enjoy their music. So it's very different, but it is interesting that the girl groups thus far that have stood out to me have been like we were talking about earlier, aespa, or like Stacy, these girl groups that are like, either aespa has a very like interesting concept and storyline as you were talking about, or like Stacy, where it's like, it feels like even just their concept so far that I've seen have like feel more relatable, and they feel like I could be friends with them, and that type of dynamic that we were talking about previously.
Yeah, and I mean, that's really like intentional. I mean, just like how their group is, their identity is like kind of empowering. And keep on mentioning Girls' Generation because like they're the group that I really resonated with me, because I got into K-pop just as they were really hitting it big, and then like I was in high school, so like high school and college age me really related to them. But like when they kind of peaked, their biggest hit is this song from 2009 called G. And if you just look at the concept of that and then the next few hits, so G, they were well known, like this is like a famous thing, they popularized colorful skinny jeans in Asia. Like it's because of them we owe colorful skinny jeans to Girls' Generation. And then like their next song, Hoot, was like based on like Bond girls. They were like wearing 70s glam like outfits and doing archery, and like there was a whole Bond theme to their music video. And they also had Oh, which was like a cheerleader video. But like this is the group who I mentioned, their first song, Into the New World, is now a protest song, and that was a song that was aspirational for girl groups. So like, and G wasn't necessarily like a very sexy thing, but then they went to like Bond girls and cheerleaders, and that was their next stuff. And then they still released a lot of other stuff, and their concepts, you look at them and you're like, they have a whole range of everything. So it doesn't really matter as much as the girl group itself is targeting, as long as their concepts all kind of align. So like with G, they were the girls next door, and then Hoot, they were the girls you wished you could be a Bond girl, like if you were that girl. But also that also is way more mainstream friendly, because then you also have male audiences kind of built into like, oh, sexy Bond girls and cheerleaders. But then they go to their another concept, Run Devil Run, which was like them all being like sleek and black and like killers. And you have like another one like I Got a Boy, where they're just like the girls next door and flirty and having a slumber party, and they just went everywhere. And K-pop groups, that's the kind of thing. You need a group concept that like resonates throughout, but you can also be flexible enough. So like G-Idol, their last song was Tomboy, and like they were very like rockish and like punky, but they've previously, like their song before that, Hwa, they were like in traditional Korean dresses and ball gowns. Like the flexibility and kind of relatability are two things that I think make K-pop groups kind of resonate with fans, but not in America, because the only people who like K-pop groups in America are usually K-pop fans who are already K-pop fans, and then the people who discover Blackpink, but like
Yeah.
they do it almost by accident at this
Yeah.
point.
So the one thing that you said that I find really interesting, and I feel like, at least to me, makes sense why girl groups as an industry in Korea are like successful and why people continuously listen to them even though there's multiples of them, is that every group kind of has their own distinct personality, even though there are still like those tropes that members have to fall into, whatever. But like, it's the same thing similarly to the Spice Girls, where like the fans at least know the personality of these artists. Like they know who they are, who their persona is, whatever you want to call it, sort of situation. But also, it's like, what girl hasn't at some point in time played dress up or done these things where it's like it's relatable to to every female of every age level, because it's like when a girl group has these concepts, like you're saying, of being the girl next door, it's like, okay, this is me and my friends, like I can see that. And then when the next thing comes out and they're dressed up in some other way, it's like, oh, I've done that before. Or like there's new other girls who listen to it and see that, like a cheerleader video, whatever, and be like, oh, that's me and my friends. And then like the other ones are just like whatever else, and so there's going to be something for people to relate to. And again, I think that that's what especially the US market was missing out on, was like the relatability, because the girls always seemed like they were stepping out of some sort of advert or some sort of thing where it's like, that's not me and my friends, like this is nothing like what we do and nothing about like what we care about. Because I think also, like, literally the other night there was a Top of the Pops like girl band retrospective thing on BBC Two like quite late at night, and I was like, wow, they know what I'm doing research for right now. And like the girl groups in England, most of these performances, they were just dressed like normal people. They're wearing cargo pants and sometimes a crop top, but nothing was overtly sexual. All of the dances were pretty copyable. Like everything felt like, oh, you and your friends could be doing this one day, because they dress like we do. They kind of are a little bit awkward. Like their dancing's not incredibly over the top like Britney and Christina's was, or anything like that. And I think that that's, again, like what America was missing out on in these girl group things, is absolutely nothing about the girl groups were ever relatable, and nothing about them felt like we could hang out with them or we could be one of them one day. Whereas from what you're explaining about K-pop girl groups, it feels like for a female audience, it's always either like, oh, we could hang out with them. If I try hard, maybe I could be in one. Or just like, we like them. Like, they seem really cool, whatever the case is. And I think that it's interesting because it's like you were saying with Blackpink, like their success in America is interesting because it seems like most people outside of the K-pop fandom who have found them either through like the Netflix documentary or through some sort of fashion situation. And I think that their marketability, a lot of, again, from just my perspective as somebody with not a lot of knowledge about this, but like too much pop culture knowledge, is the fact that like that they're being sold to America not only as the girl group Blackpink, but also as singular humans who work with certain fashion brands or whatever. And it's like, I know from working in the photo department of multiple media outlets, it's like people will go out of their way to go click through galleries from red carpets or these sort of situations. And if they see somebody who looks like they understand a brand that they really like or whatever, they're going to follow them on Instagram and they're going to start keeping up with what they're doing. And then if they really like them as a person or them as like a fashionista or whatever, they're going to start following other stuff that they do. And so I just think that it's really interesting that it's like, from the Blackpink songs that have been played on US radio and the Blackpink songs that have been like pushed in America, it's like they fit in that same sort of realm of like, a girl group has to be singing those songs. It wouldn't work in the same way if like a solo artist was singing them. And I feel like that's kind of why there's probably more of an appeal to like them compared to like Fifth Harmony or like an interest where it could be like a gateway into people finding more interest in K-pop girl groups who like might not already be into K-pop, because that girl group being a necessity thing is there. And like, I feel like we all kind of miss that.
There's a difference in Korea, which I think that in the US music market they don't really know how to handle, which is that you need a girl group to sell certain songs rather than a soloist. Like if you gave a song to one person, it's less dramatic and like it's less impactful. Also, to clarify, a lot of K-pop decisions are marketing. So like if you have more members, that means more people are more likely to like them because like maybe this one likes this one. Literally a lot of early K-pop debuts, either girls or guy group, whatever, if it's a group, the early marketing tends to be trying to get you to remember the members individually. So like Red Velvet, a very popular girl group, they literally, their initial marketing, their first music video, they each have the tips of their hair dyed a different color and they each have a different color associated with them. So many K-pop groups have different colors associated with members or an animal, like people use emojis on Twitter, and the marketing is important. So there's kind of the acknowledgement. Some stuff are better performed in a group rather than one person. And like you still kind of see the most successful girl groups tend to kind of lean into that identity of the group rather than Fifth Harmony, which was kind of, we're going to put together a group and see how this goes and hope it works. Whereas like a K-pop girl group, like that happens. But the ones that are the most successful are ones where it's like the group identity is key. The idea of like the group identity being marketable is something that I think the American market, they see it. They understand it. People like groups of people. Like people don't like the Beatles members when like they're just doing their own thing. Like Paul McCartney is never been as successful as a soloist as he has been a Beatle. People like when groups do well. People love rock bands. People like the group because we as humans are group animals. Like we are a herd humanity. But in America, we're very individualistic, so we don't really know how to market it, I think, in the way we recognize it. And that's why we end up occasionally, like every once in a while, like a music mogul is like, we're going to make a group or something. But now they've kind of, just because I report on this stuff, like a lot of American music companies have kind of like, I wouldn't say they've given up on this, but they're just like, we can just like invest in K-pop groups because they know what they're doing and we don't.
Yeah. So something I think that's really interesting, a point that you just brought up, is the fact that a lot of these K-pop songs are more impactful because they're a girl group. Whereas Sarah's point earlier was that a lot of times like Western girl groups were singing songs that just didn't make sense for them. And I think in the context of BLACKPINK, like they debuted in 2016, but they didn't really make an impact in America until 2018 with their song like Do 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 Do, as well as Kill This Love. And then they also had like How You Like That, which was a huge hit as well. And I just was thinking about, you know, the marketability as well as the impact, because with BLACKPINK, I think the fact that there's 4 members makes it really easy for America to understand and to latch onto them, because there's less personalities to have to decipher, and the fact that Rosie's from New Zealand and Lisa's from Thailand, so you already have 2 members that have like a different international perspective. They're not all just Korean. And thinking about them like going from literally that 2018 like hit to 2019 Coachella, insane, massive turnaround. And I think to this day, they're the most followed artist on YouTube. They've broken tons and tons of records. But as well, there was an article in the South China Morning Post by Dong Son-hwa in May 2020 comparing girl groups in this like boy group industry, essentially. And they talked about how BTS grossed 136 billion won through ticket sales, while touring data suggested that BLACKPINK earned 44.2 billion won. So it's like, even though BLACKPINK has had huge, massive success in America, massive success in general, broken so many streaming records, YouTube records, there's still like a splash in the pond compared to BTS. And I feel like it's not even fair to even compare them to BTS.
So actually, I don't really know if that, I happen to work for the South China Morning Post, but I don't think that's actually a good comparison, because BLACKPINK is from a company that's famously not the most proactive when it comes to promoting their artists. So BTS is constantly working, but BLACKPINK has toured one time in the past like decade and a half. Like that, I mean, they haven't existed that long, but like for every release that BTS does, BLACKPINK maybe does like one promotional cycle, like of something. Maybe they hang out once. Like I wish there was a better way to say this, but like this company called YG Entertainment are kind of famous for having, like, in comparison to the usual frenzy of K-pop promotional cycle, they're way more relaxed and slow to push their artists. Like, either the artist release cycles are slower, so like BLACKPINK released, like, I think in their entire career they've released less than 25 songs, which they're so big that's kind of crazy to think about. But when you think about that, like, when they performed at Coachella, like, they like only had singles. Like, they hadn't really released a full album. And like 21, who I mentioned before, was also under them. They also released singles and EPs. Like, their whole career, like, I think if you counted, even including the Japanese stuff, there's less than, like, I think 80 songs. I think that's actually a really high estimate, actually. Like, these groups don't put out a lot of content, whereas if you look at like a counterpart of like Blackpink's, like Red Velvet, maybe Red Velvet has put out so many LPs and so many mini albums and so much more content, and there's so much more promotional push. So I mean, obviously they're not at the same tier of popularity in the US, but like comparing Blackpink to BTS is really hard because the companies, I mean, for a lot of reasons you can compare, but I'm saying for the fiscal records, it's hard to compare because you can't say Blackpink's touring has made less than BTS because they have not toured as much. I mean, yes, they don't have the capacity. Who knows if they have the audience? They like literally are like, we're going to do maybe one show in New York every decade and one show in LA maybe every half decade. Like BTS, meanwhile, since the pandemic, has had a bunch of shows in LA and a bunch of shows in Vegas.
So basically what I'm getting from what you're saying is that even though like off touring sales, it seems like Blackpink hasn't made as much money as BTS, they kind of have, because they don't equal out of how many times like they've actually performed. So like it's not a fair comparison to say that Blackpink makes less than half of BTS when like they're touring like 0.25% of the time of BTS.
Yeah, and that's just generally kind of a K-pop gender thing, which is girl groups tend to not tour as much as boy bands, which, like, you could say it's maybe they wouldn't fill the venues. The companies just kind of gave up on that. Maybe they won't fill the halls. Maybe the tours will be total loss of money. But nobody ever really kind of tries that, and every once in a while, so sometimes they try, and it, like, is a terrible disaster, but it depends on the group, because usually people pick the wrong group to send. So, like, a group like Red Velvet, they're under a company called SM Entertainment, and SM Entertainment will tour their boy band, who is a few years under Red Velvet's generation at least, but, like, NCT 127 will tour in arenas in the US, but Red Velvet would probably maybe do theaters. So, like, the audience might be there, but the companies don't necessarily think that. But you have a group like Twice, which is another girl group, a very popular one. They actually just had an arena tour in the US, and now they're going back to LA for 2 stadium shows. So like it depends on really the group. But like if you looked at Twice's numbers in comparison to BTS's, that would probably, of like a certain year of touring, I think that would probably be more accurate than Blackpink's, because Blackpink doesn't tour, but Twice regularly sells out venues. So like that's more on par. But like kind of comparing Blackpink to BTS doesn't really make any sense for concert sales because they just don't tour as much. So like, and this is just a girl group problem. Companies tend to not push girl groups on tours. Girl groups tend to make the most money in Korea when they're promoting in Korea or they promote in Japan. You're not going to send them to the US because when they do, they tend to feel like there's no huge audience. That is changing. Girl groups tended to not tour. If you're a fan in the US of K-pop, you tended to really only see girl groups at K-Cons, which are a big music festival. They put those girl groups at K-Con with a relatively other, like only one lead boy band and then like a few little rookie groups who are like have moderate audiences, but the girl groups I think are what they're kind of betting on to get the audience. Like girl groups do draw in audiences, but it's a different sort of audience. Like boy bands have the built-in audience and girl groups kind of have to work a little harder for them.
I'm like, honestly, probably not fair to compare any K-pop group to BTS because the numbers are just so insanely different. But this conversation also made me think about, Sarah, we were talking about with Little Mix, where it's like, it felt like at a certain point, they just gave up on promoting Little Mix to an American audience. And it's kind of like, it's twofold. It's like, is the audience there or have they not like tried hard enough or tried in the right way to market it?
It's just interesting because it's like, especially right now, I feel like America is trying to like convince us as citizens, whatever, that like girl power's back and like, ooh, we're supporting women now. We're in a post-Me Too era. Time to support the girlies. But we're not, like, and especially not girls working together, because again, it's like if they prove to us that women working together can be strong and not be catfighting and having issues, we will team up and take down the government or whatever nonsense they're trying to like secretly sell in propaganda, you know. But because I just feel like even still in media, like you still always see the trope of like girl against girl and girls having issues with each other, and we're still getting articles, like they don't use the term catfight anymore, but we're still seeing articles of people having feuds with each other in pop music and all this stupid stuff, when like it's always a non-issue really when it comes down to it. And so it's like America is still seemingly trying to push the girls can't be friends, girls are always competition with each other narrative. And I feel like if any of these girl groups came over and were showing like camaraderie and female friendship and how that's actually really great and really nice and lovely, America would implode. And they'd just be like, no. They'd like Men in Black erase our memories from ever seeing that happen. But I do think it's amazing for the fact that, and like, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is like a really bad misogyny problem in South Korea, right?
Yes. Yes, there is a sizable gender inequality is huge in South Korea. It's a big issue. Just Google it. Like anybody listening, like to talk about it would be like 7,000 episodes of a podcast. Yeah. It's really bad just in general.
Yeah, it's just one of those important things to like acknowledge that we are aware that there is a very big misogyny issue in South Korea. So I do think it's interesting that there are so many successful girl groups when like there is that, because like the thing that we always come back to in multiple episodes of our podcast is like America really tries to like hide its deep-rooted like evangelical Christian hating womenness of itself, whereas like other countries are like less hiding. It's like more obvious like how much people, I mean right now obviously that's changed because of the whole Roe v. Wade thing, and so now it's like, oh no, America with its full chest is like fuck women. But it's just interesting that like South Korea is putting out so many girl groups and America's like, no, we don't want female camaraderie. Female camaraderie is bad.
I mean, I think the industry makes that quite clear in many ways, but I think also something about like Korea that people will talk about, you can say it's true or not depending on your feelings about it, but like people are always like, oh, people are more communal in Asian countries than like Western independence. So like you could pretend that that's like the reason for groups. I just think people think they're much easier to market because you have more audience members likely to like 5 people than 1 person. But I kind of just want to go back to how K-pop girl groups are being marketed in the US now, because aespa is really interesting because they just performed at Coachella the weekend after 21 made a reunion at Coachella. 21 used to be at the company BLACKPINK's under YG, and they kind of were disbanded without any, their career was amazing. It was wonderful. One thing happened and everything just imploded, and the company was just like, maybe we'll let them come back eventually. And then they didn't. So it was like big fireworks, a rainstorm, and then like, we're never going to light those fireworks ever again. And we're not even going to tell you we're not lighting them again. We're just going to like let it die. No fireworks ever again. But then they reunited at Coachella during one of member CL's set where she was performing herself during the 88 Rising set. And like, it didn't matter that they had been put together by a company in Korea that was founded by a guy who people tend to have issues with. He's currently in court for a bunch of things. So like, not allegedly the best human being, but like, it was just like a huge girl power movement because these 4 women who were put together in a girl group by a male-led company that has historically really weirdly treated their girl groups much, and female soloists like terribly in comparison to the guys. Like the guys will release like 6 albums and the girls will release 1 their entire career. And so like they kind of came together, and that was a huge deal for K-pop fans and anyone who ever loved 21. And then the next week aespa performed. aespa is a new group. They're managed by their like SM Entertainment, the company that put it together, but aespa's like a rookie. They're like a new rising girl group, and this is 21. So the dichotomy between the two of this girl group deciding to come together to like do a big moment, kind of like a Spice Girls reunion on their own terms, versus aespa, who like are this fantasy sci-fi girl group who don't really know so much about yet, except they have a bunch of hits. But they also like, if you look at their stage outfits, they kind of like, one of them she happens to be my personal favorite member, Ning Ning. She was wearing a really cute dress that like said Queen Bee on it. And I thought it was so interesting because like, yes, you could say it was like a whole statement for aespa trying to like, we're going to be the new Queen Bee on the scene. But also it was like, they put it on one member. Like they didn't like have it spread across. So it was still like kind of her identity within the group. But it was just so interesting to me. It was like, you have this one moment of like a reunion and then you have this other one where they're like trying to make them happen. So it was just like a really interesting parallel of a girl group that was huge under a male guidance, and then they fell apart under that, and now they're back together, whatever that means, even just for like one performance. And then you have like a new girl group who, like, if you look at aespa, like they are very typically gorgeous girls. Like they're pretty from like all perspectives, male perspective, female perspective. Like it's not like they're not sexy on stage. It's not like their dances aren't at all sexual. It's not like they're like Mormons or like nuns. Like they're sexy girl group. Like 21 was more outrightly like, we're empowered, and aespa's a little bit more like, we're like that cool VR girl group who like isn't a Final Fantasy video, but we're also real people. And like a lot of the promotions that K-pop companies do, it's either like too far in one direction or not enough. So like BLACKPINK, maybe the company's whole thing is just sell the fashion and the icons rather than the music, and like that is their marketing campaign. But like other companies don't really seem to have that sort of approach to marketability. It's kind of like, we'll put them at Coachella and now they're big, rather than we'll put them at Coachella and introduce them to new artists and maybe they'll collaborate and maybe they'll be big. Like there's no real guy groups. People nowadays kind of seem to know how to market them to new audiences in the US. They'll like do a collaboration with some artists who are under the same record label that they have a deal with in the US. And the girl groups, they kind of just don't really know what the audience is. So getting it back to like the whole conversation, like even K-pop girl groups who maybe have a more built-in audience, either just K-pop fans or people who are starting to listen to K-pop more, and maybe like if you're listening to Spotify, BTS, like now you'll see LE SSERAFIM because they're under the same company. So there is a sort of burgeoning built-in audience, but I just don't think they have any idea. And I think in general, K-pop doesn't know how to get from like the audience that's already there to the audience that's like going to listen to you on the radio every day. BLACKPINK did that. Like the push has to come from the industry, I think, at this point, because nobody knows how to market girl groups. And it's not that people don't want them, it's people don't know how to market them.
And probably they're scared to, based on past experience of it not going well.
Yeah, and also, obviously, women in public spaces are going to be sexualized by creeps of the internet.
Yeah.
And like, you now have to be responsible for that. Like, it's everywhere. Like, there is some sense that like, if you put out a girl group, you have to be ready to know that you're putting these girls in a place where they are going to be sexualized for the rest of their lives for like any moment that they're going to be on stage. And like, I don't think the average girl group recognizes that, and in Korea that's not something they're grappling with. And like, as a consumer, it's not something, I think the average consumer is not sitting there like, oh god, this girl is so sexy, I want to like say everything gross about her ever. But like, I think like as the industry kind of has to like acknowledges that. So like, if you put out a girl group, it's just like kind of par for the course. Like if I've asked companies like point blank, like, hey, what do you think about the fact that if you look at most deepfakes of Asian women on the internet, they're K-pop singers? So I think it's like 98% of deepfakes of Asian women on the internet are K-pop stars. So that means that 98% of fake porn that uses the face of a woman who's not real is a K-pop singer. And like, I've asked company heads and they're just like, yeah, we don't really know what to do about that. We can't really do anything about that because people are gross. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. But like, does that make it okay? Like, shouldn't you be hunting these people down? And like, that's a whole government thing in Korea. But like, if you're creating a girl group and you're putting them into the US, they're going to be open to racism. Like right now, especially, I don't really see any company pushing a K-pop group in the US right now, partially because of grounds of safety. Like, Asian hate is really big in the US right now, and just like, again, a totally different conversation, but I just think like, why risk it? Why bother? You have the built-in audience. The audience, of course, in Korea is small. It's relatively small. The US market is the biggest market in the world, so you want the international audience, but like, touring is expensive, promoting is expensive, making deals with companies is expensive, convincing people that a girl group will take off when no girl group has ever really taken off in the US in like how long? There's no real rhyme or reason. That doesn't mean that nobody should try, but I think that like, it's still a business at the end of the day, and K-pop companies are like gonna try. And like, you see huge responses to girl groups when they do tour, when they're this right size girl group, or like when they are a popular girl group, or when they like headline at KCON. Like Red Velvet at KCON was a huge thing, but then like, they had relatively small theaters for their tours because people just kind of assume that they won't sell out an arena. And things maybe have changed. Like, K-pop groups couldn't sell out arenas 10 years ago anyway. Like, there is gradual growth, but I don't think anyone knows what they're doing, honestly. I think they're all just kind of throwing darts at boards and being like, maybe Coachella will make aespa grow up, or maybe Thanksgiving Day Parade will make aespa blow up, or just maybe something. Like, people don't know, or like, maybe we throw Stacy at KCON premiere and maybe some journalist is there from the New York Times and they'll cover them or something. Like, I don't think anyone really knows what to do. BLACKPINK, they market them as fashion icons, not necessarily, or influencers, not necessarily singers. Like, Jennie was at Coachella this year. That would have been cool if she had done like a collaboration with someone or showed up on stage with somebody, but they didn't do that. Or like, why not send any of the BLACKPINK girls to Met Gala? Like, they're representatives of brands. It doesn't make any sense. Nobody knows what to do.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do.
Like, it just sounds like there's so many layers and so much confusion, and that there's always been confusion specifically in the US market about girl groups and how to market them and how to make them explode, no matter if they're from South Korea or England or even from America. And it seems like, unless it was the Spice Girls, like, other than like the Motown groups of like the 60s and that sort of era, female girl groups just haven't been able to stick here. No matter what they're throwing at the wall, like, everything seems to fall down eventually. And like, all the points you're making are really good points, because again, like, we do have a very big issue with Jenna's least favorite word, fetishization of Asian women in America, with how men treat them and all those things. So there's just like there's so many layers, and I feel like so many questions that are just never going to be answered, because America's always going to be America, and it's always going to be misogynistic and racist and disgusting about everything. And just like, your knowledge on this K-pop industry, specifically girl groups, has been so informative and helpful, and like so interesting, especially just because like the girl group industry in itself is just like a worldwide phenomenon that's like never 100% been as big as it could have or should have been. It's just like something that I think is going to be discussed and like confusing people for the rest of time, is what it seems like.
I mean, to be fair, boy bands also could be bigger, but again, like, people hate boy bands and girl groups and just pop music. But yeah, I mean, we could talk about like just girl groups in the US. I just think like female-led rock bands are hard enough to sell, and America loves rock bands. And like, the idea of pushing a pop group, pop divas, we can do pop groups, no, male, female, we don't do it. We don't really know how to do it unless it's like maybe a Disney Channel group. But like, everything is hard sell, and like, you have to, like Justin Bieber, you know, pretty boy teen, and now he like has to go in a totally other direction musically to try to like not necessarily stay active, but kind of prove his worth as a singer. And like, same thing with like the One Direction guys. I just think like, America really hates pop except divas on their terms, and like, that's like a thing in general that we have to kind of acknowledge. But I think K-pop girl groups have multitudes and layers to them, and like, does every person who listens to K-pop support everything that happens in the industry? No way. Like, I write about it for a living, and there's so many things that are wrong with every entertainment industry. It's not just Korea thing. It's like, everything ever that we put on the internet has an issue with it. Like, the world has issues with it. Surprise. And I just think girl groups, I would love if they could promote in the US more, but I think between like Korean companies not thinking it's worth the investment to some degree, and them not resonating with audiences to some degree, and then like the entertainment industry in the US really hating pop. I mean, I just think like, boy bands, again, kind of in some way, they're seen as a little bit more just better than girl groups to many people who make these decisions. Like, they're more authentic, and in Korea you kind of see that, where like, boy bands tend to have members who write their own music or produce, but girl groups, they tend to not have that, whether it's because the company wants to make more control, or they don't give them that same sort of bandwidth. But now that's kind of changing, is kind of people are recognizing that's a little bit more marketable, and also reduce costs if the member themselves write the songs. Like, you don't have to pay a songwriter. I could like rant for hours about the disparity between girl groups and K-pop and boy bands, but that's another thing. If you look at interviews with girl groups, they're way more controlled, because, and this is partially because of the situation and things in Korea, if a female says something in entertainment that's wrong, it tends to ruin their career. But male entertainers, their fans kind of maybe support them enough that they can come back. So like, you have a bunch of instances of female K-pop singers saying something wrong about political history or like history of Korea, and it like ruins their career for a while, if not forever. So like, not that everything leads back to Girls' Generation, but like, one of the members, Tiffany, she is Korean American, and when they were in Japan, she posted like a Snapchat filter that was the rising sun logo of Japan, which was used during World War II and during colonization. So like people in Korea do not like that. But like it's also a pretty Instagram filter of like a sun, like with shiny rays. And she happened to post it on like Korean Independence Day. There is probably no way that she even thought of this for like 2 seconds making a political statement. But it like ruined her career for a long time, and only now, after like a while back in the US doing her own thing, has she been able to go back to Korea to like make her like she's like done penance by like stepping out of the spotlight. And like, but like if it happens to a guy, there's a huge double standard. So K-pop girl groups, when you do interviews with them, it's not that they're not saying anything and they're not like being engaging, but like there's a sense of so much more caution by what they're saying. And like when I do interviews with like a rookie girl group, there's so many more, not necessarily more minders, because everyone in every entertainment field nowadays has tons of PR people, but like girl groups, like you just feel like there's a little bit more restraint. And I'm not saying like personally there's more restraint, but like from a PR perspective, there's more like stick to the guidelines, stick to the phrasing we have. And like if you say the wrong thing, potentially it could ruin your career or hang over you forever in this industry. And like that's everywhere, but it's like a little bit more intense and a little bit more distinct in Korea. I think like there is a double standard for a girl group and a boy band in Korea. And like when you consider that to come to the US, you know, like K-pop girl groups that are cutesy probably wouldn't sell very well. So if they decided to come to the US, the assumption is they'd have to like be sexy. They'd have to sexualize themselves more. Like audiences in Korea would get pissed about that. Like, how dare you like sell off our girls to the US? I'm not saying I support this. I'm just saying like this is like a conversation I could imagine happening. And it's like, you have no idea what these girls want. You have no idea what these girls are saying in like meeting rooms. You have no idea if they want any of this. You have no idea if they want all of it. There's just such a huge double standard from the Korea side of things and from the US industry and the audience. Like, I just think it's at a certain point, people want it and people keep on trying for it. And it works for some people, like Twice, who has a huge built-in audience already, can tour and do stadium shows.
The biggest takeaway from this conversation for me personally is that all of the misogyny we talk about in America and in American pop music, you can just copy and paste this entire podcast onto any music industry out there, because guess what? The entire world is pretty much built on the patriarchy, folks. But I think bringing it full circle, it was really enlightening to, you know, talk specifically about kind of like Western fans and the Western audience and why boy groups over the years have been so massively popular while girl groups have seen, you know, a percentage of that success in comparison, and just understanding that even that misogyny and that sexism and that internalized misogyny seeps down to the fan level too. So Tamar, I know we could talk for 9 more hours on this subject, and we want to thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise with us. And for any of our listeners who want to go learn more, want to read more of Tamar's amazing work, we will have all of the links and links to social profiles as well in the description below. So yes, Tamar, I want to give you a big thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me talk about something I feel very passionate about for a really long time.
So, Sarah, what did you learn today?
I learned so much, and I'm so thankful for Tamar and her knowledge and like her being able to make things make sense for like the first time. Because I feel like every time with K-pop, I'm like, I'm confused. But also, it's just like, it's nice when like I make my dumb general statements and she like very kindly was like, actually, this is how it actually works. I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Thank you for not just like shaming me for like not 100% understanding this. So that was nice. But it's just so interesting how there's so many parallels between especially like the misogyny and like these different things like between the US and South Korea in regards to like what we comment on, and yet what like America tries to hide from being factual about like how America acts towards women and girl groups and all of that stuff. And just like, I don't know, like what these girls go through in order to make music and like have fun and like not have to work an office job is just like so upsetting. And yeah, I mean, I just want America to get more behind girl groups and like be less stupid about it, because I'm like, just fucking like pop music. What's wrong with everybody?
I feel like the people who, well, I mean, K-pop is ever expanding its audience, but I feel like the people who genuinely like love and support girl groups and boy groups like have found K-pop and like are like, well, the American market's never gonna do it for me, so I might as well get into K-pop.
Yeah, True. I guess it's just that thing still where like we kind of talked about with Brian in our Billboard episode of just like America not really wanting to get behind things that they don't understand.
Yeah.
And how like the Billboard charts are always, gonna rule all. Because it's the same thing with like a lot of the articles that we had pulled about girl groups, and they're like, oh, like Little Mix never charted above this and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, why does that matter when they're so good and like so successful somewhere else? Like, you just have to give people a chance. I don't know. It's just frustrating. So many layers. So for y'all, our lovely listeners, what are your thoughts? Do you want us to look more into the girl group era of things, of like the late 90s, early 2000s? I feel like, at least personally, I think it'd be interesting to talk to a British person about like why England's so obsessed with girl groups, because I feel like that would be a really interesting conversation. So let us know if you'd be interested in that. You can hit us up on social media. We are at Name3Songs on all platforms, or if you have any personal beef or grievances or love letters you want to send us, I'm at Sarah_Fagan and Jenna is at Jenna_Million. So thanks for joining us this week on Name3Songs, and until next time, never let anyone make you feel bad about your favorite band.
And remember, you're never too cool to listen to a girl group.
Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when each episode comes out, and leave us a 5-star review. They really help.
If you want to find out about any of the sources we referenced in this episode, you can visit name3songs.com.